She wasn't supposed to come home early. That's the part that keeps replaying, but the cruel ordinary accident of it. If the appointment had run long, if she'd stopped for coffee, if she'd taken the longer route home the way she sometimes did when she needed to think. But Evelyn Vescari did none of those things. She came straight home, ultrasound photograph in hand, her husband's favorite dinner warm in the bag beside her, her heart so full she could barely hold it. And that's when she saw them, the red heels, sitting at the base of her staircase like they belonged there, like someone had already decided this house, her house, was a place they could make themselves comfortable. Evelyn stood in that foyer for exactly 4 seconds before she moved. She didn't run, she didn't call out. She walked upstairs the way a woman walks when she already knows what she's about to see, but still needs to see it with her own eyes, because some part of her, the stubborn, faithful part, refuses to believe it until there is absolutely no other explanation left. She found them in the bedroom she and Roman had shared for 6 years. If you have ever had the floor disappear beneath your feet while you were still standing on it, you know what happened to Evelyn in that doorway. And if you've never had that happen to you, ask yourself this. What would you do if the person you trusted most in this world looked up and saw you standing there, and their first instinct wasn't guilt, but calculation? If this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what happens next. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it moves you, leave a like. It helps more than you know. Now let's go back to the beginning. The morning started the way most catastrophic mornings do. Quietly, with coffee, with ordinary conversation, with no warning at all that anything was about to end. Evelyn had been awake since 6. Not because the pregnancy was making sleep difficult yet, though that was coming. She could feel her body beginning to shift, beginning to make room for the small, extraordinary thing growing inside her. She was awake because she was nervous. The kind of nervous that lives in your chest and makes you stupid with anticipation, makes you double-check your bag 3 times for paperwork you've already confirmed is there. This was the appointment, the first real one. The one where you stopped being a woman who had taken a home test and started being a woman who had seen proof, actual proof, that the life inside her had a heartbeat and a shape and a future. She wanted Roman there. She had asked him 2 weeks ago, and he'd said yes without hesitation, which was not always the way Roman Vescari said yes to things. He was a man who weighed everything. His agreements came measured, conditional, wrapped in the kind of careful language that left him room to move. But this one had been immediate. "I'll be there," he had said. "I'm not missing that." So she believed him. That was her first mistake. Not the trusting, because you cannot fault a wife for trusting her husband of 6 years. The mistake was the believing, which is a different thing entirely. Trusting is something you choose. Believing is something you do when you've stopped asking questions, when the evidence has piled up so consistently in one direction that examining it in the other direction feels like an insult to everything you've built. Evelyn had stopped asking questions about Roman a long time ago. Not because she was naive. She wasn't. She knew what Roman Vescari was. She had known from the beginning, before the marriage, before the ring, before the house in the hills outside Chicago, where the rooms were too large and the security too visible for anyone to pretend it was just a successful businessman's home. She knew about the organization. She knew about the meetings that went until 2 in the morning and the phone calls he took outside, regardless of the weather, and the way certain men looked at her husband when he walked into a room. The way animals look at something above them in the food chain. Not with admiration exactly. With acknowledgement. The kind that lives in the body before it reaches the brain. She had made her peace with it, or something close enough to peace that she could live inside it without constant pain. What she had never made peace with, what she had quietly, privately decided was the one thing she would not survive, was betrayal of a personal kind. Not his empire, not his enemies, not the violence that existed on the perimeter of their life like weather she had learned to ignore. Just him, and her, and the vow between them. She thought he understood that. She thought 6 years had made it clear. She was getting dressed when her phone rang. Roman. She answered it the way she always answered his calls, without the small clutch of dread that some women get, because Roman had never given her real reason for that dread. Not yet. "Hey," she said. "Evelyn." There was noise behind him, voices, something that sounded like controlled urgency. I can't make it this morning. She stopped moving. What? Something came up. I can't explain it right now, but it can't wait. A pause. The kind of pause that is not silence, but is filled with things not being said. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Go, take pictures. Tell me everything when you get home. She stood in the middle of the bedroom in one shoe. Roman, this is the ultrasound appointment. I know what it is. You said you wouldn't miss it. I know what I said. His voice shifted, not to cruelty, never to cruelty with her, but to that particular Roman Vescari flatness that meant the decision had already been made, and the conversation was about the aftermath, not the choice. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you. I promise. She wanted to fight. There was a version of this conversation where she said everything she was actually thinking, where she told him that the promises of men who have already broken one don't carry the same weight, where she asked him to tell her honestly whether a meeting could not wait a single hour while his pregnant wife saw their child for the first time. She didn't say any of it. That was her second mistake. Not the silence. The silence was just self-protection. The mistake was what she replaced it with. Okay, she said. One word, flat, final. And she finished getting dressed, alone, and drove to the clinic, alone, and sat in a waiting room full of couples and held her own hand in the empty chair beside her. The clinic was on the north side. Small, warm, the kind of medical office that put effort into not feeling like a medical office. Soft chairs, photographs of babies on the walls at tasteful intervals. A receptionist who remembered your name. Evelyn had chosen it deliberately. She had wanted the first time to feel like something worth remembering. She hadn't planned on remembering it this way. She sat between a woman roughly her age whose husband kept rubbing her back in slow, absent circles, clearly without thinking. The way you touch someone when touching them is just a thing your body does without being instructed. And an older couple, probably second marriage, the woman visibly anxious, the man holding her hand with both of his, leaning in to say something that made her laugh against her will. Evelyn looked at her phone. No message from Roman. She put it face down on her lap and looked at the wall. When they called her name, she walked back alone. When the technician asked where her husband was, and she said work emergency, she said it with enough ease that it was almost convincing. When she lay back and the technician placed the probe and the screen filled with static, and then, suddenly, not static, she cried. Not loud, not the way you cry in movies with composure-shattering sobs and dramatic inhales. She cried the way women cry when they're trying not to make it about themselves, quietly, pressing her lips together, blinking fast, the tears making it past anyway. Because there was a heartbeat. Because it was real. Because that small, blurry, impossible shape on the screen was half Roman and half her, and entirely someone who did not yet know the world it was being born into. She took the photograph they printed for her and held it like it was something breakable. In the car, she sat for a moment and thought about calling him, sending him the image immediately, making him see it on his phone screen during whatever meeting had been more important than being there. She wanted him to feel it, to understand the weight of what he had missed. Instead, she drove to the restaurant where she ordered his favorite, the braised short rib, the good bread, the soup he never admitted he loved but always finished, and she brought it home in a bag, still warm, planning the moment she would show him, planning the words, planning the look on his face. She was going to forgive him. She had already decided. Because that's what you do when someone you love makes a mistake, and the relationship is worth more than the mistake. You choose it, deliberately, even when it costs you something. She was choosing it on the drive home. She was choosing it when she pulled into the drive. She was still choosing it when she unlocked the front door and stepped inside. And then she saw the red heels. They were expensive. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see that. The particular shine of good leather, the height that required balance and confidence to wear, the kind of heel that announces itself without apology. They sat at the base of the staircase like someone had stepped out of them in a hurry, or like someone had left them there without caring whether they were noticed. Evelyn set the dinner bag down on the entry table. She stood very still. The house was not silent. There were sounds coming from upstairs. Quiet sounds. The kind that require closed doors to contain. She walked to the base of the stairs and looked up. Later, she would not be able to explain clearly what she felt in those seconds. People who have been through something like this describe it differently. Some say they went cold. Some say they couldn't breathe. Some say time stretched or compressed, or that they felt detached from their own body, watching themselves move from somewhere slightly above and to the left. Evelyn felt something simpler and more terrible than any of that. She felt foolish. That was the thing that struck first, not grief, not rage, not even shock. Just this hideous, humiliating sense of her own stupidity. The missed appointment. The vague emergency. 6 years of telling herself she was a woman who understood the world she lived in and had made clear-eyed, informed choices about what she could accept. She had understood nothing. She walked upstairs. She didn't rush. There was no point in rushing. Whatever was behind that door was already true, and opening it faster would not change the truth, only the timing of her knowing it. So she walked the way she had walked to the clinic that morning, steadily, precisely, with the particular dignity of a woman who is not going to let anyone watch her fall apart before she is ready to fall apart. She opened his bedroom door. Roman saw her first. That was the thing she would remember most precisely in the months that followed. Not what she saw, not what the other woman looked like. She would barely be able to describe her later, the image blurred by shock into vague impressions of dark hair and a silk robe that was not Evelyn's. What she would remember, with perfect and permanent clarity, was Roman's face in the half-second before he could arrange it. The calculation. He was already assessing, already moving from what is happening to what do I do next. And behind the calculation, beneath it, almost invisible, was something she could only name as relief that it was finally out, the way certain men feel relief when a secret they've been keeping finally breaks the surface, because at least now the hiding is over. That relief lasted exactly 1 second before the horror of his situation replaced it. Evelyn. She didn't speak. She reached into her bag. Her hand found the ultrasound photograph. She walked to the small table in the corner of the bedroom, the one where Roman put his keys every night, the one she had never moved because it was one of those small, ordinary habits that make a home feel inhabited. And she placed the photograph on it, face up, and stepped back. The image was clear. Even from across the room, it was clear. The small curved shape, the date and time printed in the corner, the clinic's name, the measurements that meant something to anyone who knew how to read them. She looked at Roman. "You missed meeting your child," she said, "for this." The woman on the bed made a sound, started to say something. Evelyn did not look at her. She was looking only at Roman, at his face going gray, at his hands, which had stilled completely, at the way his mouth opened and then closed without producing a single word. Roman Vescari, who always had words, who had built a life and an empire on the precise management of what he said and when he said it, standing utterly speechless. She turned around and walked back downstairs. She picked up the dinner bag from the entry table. She put it in the kitchen, turned off the stove she had preheated out of habit, and walked to the room she used as a home office. She locked the door. She sat down on the floor, not at the desk, on the floor, back against the door. And she held the ultrasound photograph against her chest, and she breathed. She did not cry. She was done crying for today. She had spent all of it at the clinic, on the right thing, on the true thing. She was not going to spend any more of it on this. She sat there for a long time. She could hear Roman downstairs eventually. She could hear the front door opening and closing. She could hear footsteps outside her office door. His voice, once, saying her name. Not commanding, not the voice he used with everyone else, but quieter, rougher. The private voice she had never heard him use on anyone but her. "Evelyn, please." She said nothing. She sat with her back against the door and her hand on the photograph, and she did what she had always been better at than anyone gave her credit for. She thought. She thought with the cold, methodical precision of a woman who has just had every warm thing stripped away and is left with only the facts of her situation. And the facts, laid out plainly, were these. She was 28 years old. She was 3 months pregnant. She was married to a man who ran a criminal organization in one of America's largest cities. She had just found him in their bed with another woman. And she was the only person in this house, possibly in this entire world, who understood the full extent of what Roman Vescari's marriage had been built on, which meant she was also the only person who understood how catastrophically wrong that foundation had just proven to be. She had one advantage. Roman had spent 6 years assuming she was an observer. She wasn't. By the time the house went quiet, well past midnight, Roman finally giving up on the door, Evelyn had the outline of what came next. She had never wanted to be his enemy, but if he had made her one, she intended to be a thorough one. She waited until she heard nothing. Then she stood up, unlocked the door, and moved through the dark house with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been planning for an emergency she had prayed would never come. She had a bag packed within 40 minutes. Not everything, just what mattered. Documents. The drive she kept in the office with the files she had been quietly assembling for 2 years without fully admitting to herself why she was assembling them. Her grandmother's jewelry, which had never technically been Roman's and which a good lawyer could keep out of any accounting. The ultrasound photograph tucked carefully between 2 sheets of paper so it wouldn't crease. She stood in the entry hall one last time. The red heels were gone. She looked at the staircase, at the house she had made into something livable, something that felt like a real home despite everything it was built on. She thought about the woman she had been when she walked into it for the first time 6 years ago. Hopeful, clear-eyed, certain that she understood the bargain she was making and that she could live inside it without losing herself. She had been mostly right. She just hadn't calculated for this. She opened the front door and walked out into the pre-dawn Chicago dark, and she did not look back. Not because she wasn't heartbroken. She was, completely, the grief already moving through her like something physical. But because looking back would not change anything, and Evelyn Vescari had always been, at her core, a woman who dealt with what was actually in front of her. What was in front of her now was a city, a pregnancy, and the beginning of the most consequential fight of her life. She got in the car and drove. By sunrise, she was gone. And Roman Vescari, who had built his life on the absolute certainty that he could find anything, control anything, survive anything, would spend the next several weeks discovering that the most dangerous person in his world had not been any of his enemies. It had been the quiet woman he had underestimated for 6 years, the one carrying his child, the one who had stopped waiting for an apology and started building a case. The first call Roman made was at 5:47 in the morning. He was standing in the kitchen in yesterday's shirt, the collar open, his phone already warm from being held too long. He had not slept. He had spent the night moving between rooms, the office, the kitchen, the bottom of the stairs where he would stand and look up at the closed bedroom door as if proximity to the space where it had happened might give him something useful, an answer, a way back in, something. What it gave him was nothing except the particular agony of a man who is accustomed to solving problems and has just encountered one he cannot solve with any of the tools he has. The call went to Marco first. Marco Assetti, who had been Roman's head of security for 11 years, and who answered on the second ring, because Marco always answered on the second ring, day or night, because that was the arrangement, and Marco was a man who honored arrangements. "She's gone," Roman said. A beat of silence, then, "How long?" "I don't know, sometime after 2. Roman pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. "She took a bag, documents, her car's gone. I'll start making calls." "Don't use the regular channels." Roman moved to the window. Outside, the grounds were gray and still in the early light, the security perimeter exactly where it was supposed to be, utterly useless for the only thing he needed it for right now. "I don't want this getting around the organization before I understand what's happening." Another pause. Longer this time. Marco was a careful man. He chose his moments to speak and his moments to stay quiet with the precision of someone who had survived a long time in a world where the wrong word at the wrong moment could be the last word you ever said. "Roman," he said finally. "What happened?" Roman didn't answer that. "Find her," he said, and ended the call. He stood at the window for a long time after that. The sky was doing its slow, indifferent shift from black to gray to the particular washed-out blue of a Chicago morning in early spring. He watched it the way you watch something that has nothing to do with you but is at least moving, at least changing, when everything inside the house has gone completely and terrifyingly still. He picked up the ultrasound photograph from the kitchen counter where he had placed it the night before. He had moved it from the bedroom table to here because he couldn't be in that room, but he couldn't be away from this either. He stood and looked at it for a long time. The date in the corner. The shape on the screen that meant nothing to an untrained eye and everything to anyone who knew what they were looking at. His name wasn't on it. The clinic's name was. Evelyn's name was. He set it down, face up, and left the kitchen. By noon of that first day, Marco had run 6 traces and come back with nothing usable. Evelyn's phone was off. Not dead. Off, which meant deliberate. Her car had last pinged a traffic camera at 4:22 a.m. heading south on a route that could take her to a dozen different points and told them exactly nothing. Her credit cards had not been used. Her bank account, the personal one that Roman had always kept separate from the household accounts, as a matter of principle. One of the few decisions from the early years of their marriage that now felt, in retrospect, like a gesture of genuine respect, showed no activity. "She's not using anything we can trace," Marco told him over the phone. "She's either got cash or she's using something we don't know about." "She's got both," Roman said. He said it with the flat certainty of a man who has just understood something he should have understood much earlier, because he knew Evelyn. He had lived with her for 6 years, and he knew how she thought. The methodical patience of it, the way she never made a move without understanding 3 moves ahead. He had always admired it in the abstract. He had always thought of it as one of the things that made her remarkable. He had never, not once, considered it as something that could be turned against him. "Keep looking," he said, quietly. "And Celeste?" Marco asked. Roman's jaw tightened. "She's gone. Make sure she stays that way." He meant away from the house. Marco, who knew Roman well enough to understand the difference between that and the other kind of gone, said nothing and ended the call. By the 3rd day, the story had started leaking inside the organization the way water leaks through a wall, not through any single visible crack, but through everything at once, appearing in small damp patches in corners where you weren't looking. It wasn't the affair itself. Affairs were not remarkable in this world. Men of Roman's position in history were not expected to be saints, and no one in his organization would have blinked at the existence of a woman on the side. It was the wife. That was the crack. The fact that Evelyn Vescari, who had been a quiet and unremarkable presence beside Roman for 6 years, pleasant, educated, the kind of woman men in the organization respected without particularly noticing, had apparently walked out of Roman's fortified property in the middle of the night, taking enough to suggest planning rather than impulse, and vanished so completely that Roman's network couldn't locate her. That was not the behavior of an upset wife. That was the behavior of someone who had been ready. People began adding things up, quietly, in the margins of conversations that were officially about other things, and the sum they kept arriving at was the same uncomfortable number. Evelyn Vescari knew something, maybe several somethings, and she had left before anyone could determine what she intended to do with that knowledge. Roman's consigliere, a man named Sal Ferretti, who was 63 years old and had served 2 Vescari bosses before Roman, requested a meeting on the 4th day. He came to the house, sat across from Roman in the study, and folded his hands on the desk in the way he always did when he was about to say something he knew would not be well received. "The Rinaldi brothers want to know if there's been a change in your domestic situation," Sal said. "There's no change," Roman said. "They're asking because the Loomis Street investment has missed a review call. Twice." Roman looked up. "What do you mean missed? Who's managing the review calls?" Evelyn was. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. She was the one coordinating between the legitimate holding company and the attorneys, Sal continued. He said it carefully, precisely, without any editorializing, the way he delivered information he did not want to be responsible for, but felt obligated to transmit. She had been managing the communication layer for the Loomis development for approximately 8 months. "You delegated it to her after—" "I know when I delegated it." Roman stood up and moved to the window. He stood with his back to Sal, looking at the same gray grounds he'd been staring at for 4 days. She stopped responding to them. "Yes. And the attorneys?" "Same." Roman turned around. "How deep is she in the Loomis structure?" Sal opened his hand slowly on the desk. It was not a gesture of helplessness. It was a gesture of careful, deliberate disclosure. "Deep enough that without her signature, the capital draw scheduled for next month cannot proceed on its current timeline." Roman stared at him. "She's not running," Sal said quietly. It was the same thing he'd been thinking, arriving at the surface as words for the first time. "She's not hiding. She's repositioning," Roman said. Sal said nothing. Roman walked back to his desk and sat down. He picked up the phone, put it down again. He pressed both hands flat on the desk surface and looked at them for a moment, then looked at Sal. "Who else knows about the Loomis situation?" "The Rinaldis. Their attorney. My office." A pause. Dario Krell's people have been asking about the Loomis development through a third party. Timing may be coincidental. It isn't, Roman said. No, Sal agreed. Probably not. Evelyn had been in the apartment for 5 days before she made the call she had been building towards since the night she left. The apartment was small, deliberately so. A place chosen for utility rather than comfort, in a neighborhood where nobody who knew Roman Vescari would think to look because it bore no resemblance to any place she had ever lived before. A friend's name on the lease, a cash arrangement, a building with enough foot traffic that one more woman with a bag and a preoccupied expression generated no curiosity. She had spent the 5 days doing 2 things. The first was resting, genuinely resting, the physical rest of early pregnancy that her body had been demanding for weeks, and that the pace of her former life had not permitted. She slept 9 hours. She ate without planning or performance. She sat in the small quiet of the apartment and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened without immediately moving to solve it, which was harder than it sounded for a woman whose instinct was always to move forward. She let herself grieve the marriage. Not publicly, not in a way anyone would see, but privately, thoroughly, with the kind of honesty that requires no witness. She sat with the fact that the life she had chosen, complicated as it was, morally questionable as it was in ways she had made her peace with, was over. That the man she had loved, specifically and genuinely, had made a choice that could not be walked back. That the pregnancy, which should have been the most purely joyful thing of the last 6 years, would now be tangled with this forever. She sat with all of it. And then, on the 5th evening, she opened her laptop and called Naomi Calder. Naomi Calder was 47 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and had spent the last 19 years practicing family law in Chicago with the particular relentlessness of someone who discovered early in her career that she was not interested in being liked by opposing counsel. She had taken on 3 cases involving organized crime figures and won all 3, not by being cleverer than the men on the other side, though she was, but by understanding one fundamental truth that most people in her position failed to grasp. Criminal men who built their empires on controlling women consistently underestimated how much those women knew. She had been waiting for Evelyn's call. Not this specific call, but a call like it from a woman like this. She had known Evelyn Vescari existed. She had known who Roman Vescari was. And she had known, with the quiet, unglamorous certainty of a woman who has seen this particular pattern too many times, that marriages like theirs produced calls like this one eventually. "Tell me where you are," Naomi said. "I'm safe," Evelyn said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." A pause. "I'm not telling anyone where I am yet." Naomi nodded, even though Evelyn couldn't see it. "Okay, tell me what you have." And Evelyn told her. She told her about the investment structures, the legitimate holdings that had been built through a combination of Roman's money and, in several cases, money that Evelyn had brought into the marriage from her own inheritance, money that had been folded into joint ventures without always being clearly delineated. She told her about the Loomis development and about 3 other properties. She told her about the attorneys she knew by name, the partners she had met at dinners, the paperwork she had signed and the paperwork she had witnessed. She spoke for 40 minutes without stopping. When she finished, Naomi was quiet for a moment. "You've been keeping notes," she said. "For a while," Evelyn said. "How long is a while?" A brief pause. "Long enough." Naomi made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I'm going to need you to send me everything. Use the secure transfer I'm going to text you in about 3 minutes. Don't use email. Don't use your own cloud storage. Use exactly what I send you." "Okay." "And Evelyn." Naomi's voice shifted. Not softer exactly, but direct in a different way. "I need you to understand something before we go any further. What you're describing, the documentation you have, the positions you held in his legitimate structures, this gives us leverage that most women in your situation don't have. But using it means starting a war, not a divorce. A war. Are you prepared for that?" Evelyn looked at the window of the small apartment, at the streetlight outside, at the ordinary, anonymous city going about its ordinary business beyond the glass. "I didn't start it," she said. "No," Naomi said, "but you'll have to finish it." "I know." Roman got the first legal notification 9 days after Evelyn left. It came through his attorney, a man named Gerald Fuchs, who handled Roman's legitimate legal affairs, and who called Roman's personal line at 8:15 in the morning with the tone of a man who is about to deliver news he would prefer not to be involved with. "I've received a formal notification of intent to file for divorce," Gerald said. "It comes from a Naomi Calder, family law, North Michigan Avenue." Roman said nothing. "I know the name," Gerald continued. "She's very good. She's filed an accompanying demand for a full accounting of all marital assets, and she's listed specific properties by name." "Which properties?" Gerald listed them. Roman closed his eyes. "She's also flagged the Loomis development specifically as containing commingled marital funds, which means it may be subject to equitable distribution regardless of how the holding structure is set up." Gerald paused. "Roman, I have to ask, how much does she actually know about the internal structures?" The answer to that question was everything, but Roman did not say that. He said, "I'll call you back," and hung up. He sat in the study for a long time. On the desk in front of him was a photograph of Evelyn. Not the ultrasound, He'd moved that upstairs, placed it on the bedroom table where she had left it exactly there because moving it felt like something he wasn't ready to do. This was an older photograph from before the marriage, from a trip they had taken to the coast in the second year they were together, when he had still been capable of taking trips that were genuinely trips and not logistics exercises with ocean views. She was laughing in the photograph, looking at something off-frame. Her hair was doing the thing it did in humidity, the slight curls she was always trying to manage, and she was wearing a yellow dress that he had once said made her look like someone in a painting, which was not the most articulate compliment he had ever given, but had been received as the most genuine. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he called Marco. "I need to talk to Celeste," he said. "Today." Celeste Armand lived in a condominium on the Gold Coast that Roman had not paid for, but whose existence he had been aware of. She was not a secret he had kept carelessly, which is to say, she was a secret he had kept at all, which now struck him as a form of particular stupidity he did not have the vocabulary to properly examine. She let him in with the air of a woman who has been expecting this visit and is not entirely sure if it is good news or bad news, but has decided to perform confidence until she finds out which. She was dressed deliberately. That was the first thing he noticed. Not casual, not caught off guard, put together, controlled. The kind of controlled that takes preparation. She led him into the living room and sat across from him and crossed her legs and waited. "Tell me about the morning," Roman said. "What morning?" "You know what morning." She tilted her head. "You'll need to be specific." "The morning Evelyn came home." His voice was level. Completely, dangerously level. The voice he used in rooms where people were deciding whether he was angry enough to act, and he wanted them uncertain. "You knew she had an appointment that morning." Something moved across Celeste's face, fast, almost imperceptible. But Roman had spent his life reading rooms, reading people, and he caught it. "I knew you had meetings," she said carefully. "You told me you'd come by at 11. You've never come by before noon." He leaned forward. "She had a 9 o'clock appointment. She would have been back by 11:30 on the outside. You timed it." "Roman, that's—" "Don't." The word came out flat and final. "Don't tell me I'm wrong. You're a lot of things, but you've never been a convincing liar to my face. And this is not a situation where I'm going to accept a bad performance." Celeste was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, some of the performance had dropped. Not all of it, but enough to make what was left more interesting. "I thought it would clarify things," she said. "Clarify." "Between you and her, between you and—" She stopped. "Between you and me," Roman said. She looked at him. "You wanted her to find us," he said. "You wanted it to happen that way. In that house, on that morning, when she was coming from—" He stopped. He pressed his jaw together so hard he could feel the pressure in his back teeth. "You knew she was pregnant." The silence that followed was the kind that answers a question by refusing to deny it. Roman stood up. He stood very still for a moment, the way men stand when they are making decisions about how to behave under conditions that are testing the outer limits of their self-control. He looked at Celeste with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, though anger was inside it. Something colder than anger. The look of a man who has just performed a calculation and arrived at a number he cannot dismiss. "Who else knew?" he said. "What?" Who told you to be there that morning? Who knew about her appointment because you didn't find that out on your own? Celeste stood up too. The performance was entirely gone now. What replaced it was something that might have been fear and might have been the beginning of a decision about how much to admit. I want you to leave, she said. That's not an answer. Roman, Celeste. He said her name the way he said the names of men who had made errors of judgment in his presence, without heat, without drama. With the specific weight of someone who has finished asking questions and beginning to arrive at conclusions without assistance. I'm going to find out. That's not a threat. It's just the next thing that happens. And when I find out, when I know exactly who you were talking to and why you were talking to them, the conversation we have after that is going to be very different from this one. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. You should think carefully, he said, about what you want to tell me before that happens. He left. In the elevator on the way down, he stood very still and let himself feel what he had been carefully not feeling since the conversation in that living room had begun to go in the direction it went. Someone had used Celeste. Someone had known about the appointment, known about the timing, known that Evelyn would be returning from the clinic with the ultrasound photograph of their unborn child, and had arranged for her to walk into exactly what she walked into. The affair itself had been real. Roman was not going to pretend otherwise, not even inside his own head where self-deception costs nothing. He had made that choice. He owned it. But the morning, the specific, engineered, deliberate cruelty of that morning, that had not been accidental. Someone had planned it. And the only reason to plan it was because someone wanted Evelyn gone from his life. Wanted the marriage destroyed. Wanted Roman isolated and destabilized and publicly humiliated in the way that only a man's own domestic life can humiliate him, from the inside out, where the armor doesn't reach. The elevator doors opened. He walked out into the Gold Coast afternoon, bodyguards falling into position around him automatically, and he pulled out his phone and called Sal. I need everything we have on Dario Krell, he said, and I need it today. The divorce papers arrived during a meeting. Roman had been in the middle of a conversation with 4 of his senior people, the kind of meeting that has no official name and takes place in a room with no phones except the ones belonging to the men in it, which is to say a room that takes the pretense of privacy seriously. They were discussing the Loomis situation, which had become a genuine operational problem in the 10 days since Evelyn had stopped responding to the attorneys, and they were discussing it with the tense, careful diplomacy of men who are trying to solve a problem without acknowledging how the problem started. His personal phone buzzed. Gerald. He excused himself. He took the call in the hallway, which was also a kind of privacy, a hallway visible to his men through the glass wall of the meeting room, all of them watching him with the attention of people who know something is wrong and are measuring how wrong by the quality of his stillness. The papers were filed this morning, Gerald said. Officially. The demand for accounting is attached. It's a pause. Roman, she's listed 23 separate assets. Some of these I didn't even know existed in her name. Which ones? Gerald listed them. 3 of the properties were ones that Roman had not thought about in connection with their marriage because he had not thought about them as connected to Evelyn in any meaningful way. He had filed them, mentally, as his. As organizational assets that happened to run through legitimate structures that happened to involve his wife's name on the occasional document. He had not considered that Evelyn might have spent 6 years filing them differently. There's also a note from Calder, Gerald said. His voice had gone quiet. The particular quiet of a man who is about to say something he really does not want to say. It's addressed to you personally. It's not standard legal correspondence. Read it. Gerald cleared his throat. Mr. Vescari, my client is prepared to conclude this matter with minimum exposure for all parties. She is also in possession of information pertaining to third-party interference in your business operations, which she is prepared to discuss under the appropriate conditions. She asks only that you reflect on the difference between what you've built and what you've lost, and consider which one you are actually prepared to fight for. The hallway was absolutely silent. Roman held the phone against his ear and looked at the glass wall of the meeting room, at his 4 senior men watching him, at the careful, controlled expressions of people who are pretending they cannot see that something has just fundamentally shifted. He thought about the word third party. He thought about Celeste. He thought about Dario Krell's name appearing in Sal's preliminary report that morning, appearing specifically in connection with 2 of Roman's legitimate investments, connected through a chain of intermediaries that was designed to be invisible and had nearly been. Third-party interference. Evelyn knew something about Dario, and she had been waiting, sitting quietly in whatever apartment she had disappeared into with her legal counsel and her documentation and her precise, patient knowledge of Roman's world, waiting to see what Roman would do next before she decided how far she was willing to go. He put the phone in his pocket. He went back into the meeting room. He sat down. The 4 men at the table waited. "We have a problem," Roman said, "and it's not the one any of us thought it was." He looked around the table, at Sal, who already knew part of it, and was watching Roman with the careful attention of a man who has been in this business long enough to recognize when the ground has shifted under everyone's feet at once, at the others who were still catching up. "Someone arranged for my wife to find out about my affair," Roman said. He said it without apology and without softness, and without the slightest indication that saying it in front of these men cost him anything, because showing cost in this room was not something he could afford. "That someone is connected to Dario Krell, and that means what I thought was a domestic situation is actually a play against this organization." The room was very quiet. "My wife," Roman continued, "is in possession of information about that play, and she is currently using it as leverage in a divorce proceeding." He let that land. Let the men at the table do the math on what it meant that Roman Vescari's estranged pregnant wife was the person holding the evidence that could expose a rival's conspiracy. "So here's where we are. I need to find Evelyn, not to bring her home, not to threaten her." He looked at each of them in turn. "To talk to her, because right now she is the only person in this situation who has all the pieces." Sal folded his hands on the table. "She may not want to talk." "I know," Roman said. "She has good reason not to." "I know that too. And if she decides that her leverage is more valuable held than surrendered, then we have a problem that money and men cannot solve." Roman sat back. "Which is why I am the one who needs to find her. Not you, not Marco, me." The room processed this. "There's something else," Sal said. "Say it. If Dario knows that Evelyn has the information, and if he has any reason to believe she might use it, she becomes a target." The old man said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact you wish were not a fact. Right now, whatever protection she has comes from the assumption that she and Roman Vescari are in a legal dispute. The moment Dario understands she's a threat to his operation, that protection disappears. Roman was already standing up. "Then we don't have time to wait for her to come to us," he said. He was halfway to the door when Sal's voice stopped him. "Roman." He turned. Sal looked at him with the expression of a man who has watched powerful men make catastrophic errors for 40 years and has never fully developed the ability to stop caring about the outcome. "Be careful," Sal said, "about the difference between wanting her back and needing her safe. They require different things from you, and right now she will know immediately which one is driving you." Roman held the old man's gaze for a moment. Then he walked out. In the car, with Marco driving and the city moving past the windows in the gray afternoon light, Roman stared at his phone. At the number he still had for Evelyn, the number that had been going straight to voicemail for 12 days. He stared at it for a long time. Then he typed a text. Not a threat. Not an apology. 3 sentences. "I know about Dario. I know you have the information. You may be in danger. Not from me. Please respond." He sent it. He put the phone face down on the seat beside him and looked out the window. 3 blocks later, his phone buzzed. He picked it up. Her response was 4 words. "I know, I'm ready." He read those 4 words twice. Then he looked up at the back of Marco's head, at the city sliding past the glass, at the gray Chicago sky above all of it. The same sky that had been above Evelyn when she walked out of the house 12 days ago with the ultrasound photograph and his favorite dinner and whatever she had already begun planning. He understood then, with the cold clarity that comes only when you stop lying to yourself, what Sal had been trying to tell him. Evelyn had not been running. She had been waiting for Roman to catch up to the situation she had already mapped. She had been, from the moment she placed that photograph on the table and walked out of the room, several moves ahead of everyone. Ahead of Celeste, ahead of Dario, ahead of Roman himself. And the question that was going to determine everything about what came next was not whether Roman could find her. She had just told him she was ready. The question was whether Roman Vescari, who had spent 31 years building an empire on the assumption that he was always the most dangerous person in any room, was prepared to walk into a room where that was no longer true. She chose the meeting place herself. That was the first thing Roman noticed when the message came through. Not just the 4 words, but 20 minutes later, a second message with an address and a time. A coffee shop on the west side, the kind of place that was aggressively ordinary, that existed in the middle of a block of other ordinary places, that had no private rooms and no back exits and no corners dark enough to conduct anything that was not entirely visible to anyone who cared to look. She had chosen somewhere public deliberately. She did not trust him. He arrived 12 minutes early and sat where he could see the door, which was instinct, and ordered coffee. He did not intend to drink, which was habit. Marco was outside. 2 other men were positioned at intervals along the block, also instinct, also habit. Roman had spent so much of his life surrounded by security that its presence had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like weather, just something that existed around him, that he moved through without noticing. He was noticing it today. He was noticing it because Evelyn would notice it, and because what Evelyn thought when she walked through that door mattered in a way that operational security did not, and he was still working out how to hold both of those things at once in a brain that had been trained for 31 years to treat everything as a variable in a calculation. She came in at exactly the time she had specified. She was further along than he had been prepared for. He knew this, mathematically. He could count the weeks the same way she could, but knowing and seeing were different things, and the sight of her, in a gray coat that hung open over the visible change in her silhouette, stopped something in his chest with a physical completeness that he would not have been able to explain to anyone who had not experienced it. She looked well. That was the other thing. She looked not happy, not soft, nothing that simple, but solid, like someone who had spent 2 weeks rebuilding the load-bearing walls of themselves and had done it carefully. She looked like a woman who did not need anything from the person she was about to sit across from. She sat down. She did not take her coat off. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for conversations that required her full attention. Not hostile, not warm, precisely calibrated. "You said Dario," she said. No greeting, no preamble. "Yes," Roman said. "Tell me what you know." He told her. He laid it out the way Sal had laid it out for him. The preliminary connections between Dario's organization and Roman's legitimate holdings, the third-party structure designed to obscure the interference, the timeline that placed the beginning of it approximately 14 months ago. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had always been a good listener, the kind that made you aware of it, that made you choose your words more carefully because her attention had weight. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He started earlier than that," she said. Roman looked at her. She reached into the bag on the chair beside her and placed a folder on the table between them. Not pushing it toward him, just placing it, in the neutral space, available. 18 months, she said. The first contact between Celeste and one of Dario's intermediaries was 18 months ago. I have the communication records. She paused. I have a lot of things. Roman looked at the folder. He did not pick it up. How? He said. It was the only question that mattered in that moment. Not what was in the folder, not what she intended to do with it, but how she had gotten it, because the answer to that question would tell him exactly how long she had known and exactly what kind of fool he had been. Evelyn looked at him steadily. You built your empire, she said, on the assumption that the people closest to you were either loyal or controlled. You never considered a third category, which is watching. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. I've been watching for a long time, Roman. Not because I was suspicious of you, because I was curious about the world I was living in, and I'm not capable of living in a world I don't understand. A pause. Celeste was careless with her phone at a dinner 14 months ago. I saw something I wasn't meant to see. I didn't know what it meant at the time, so I kept watching. Roman sat very still. You kept watching, he said. I kept notes, she said. I built files. I cross-referenced things. I talked to people, not your people, different people. People who had no reason to report back to anyone in your organization. She glanced at the folder. It took a while to understand the shape of it, but once I did, she stopped. Then quietly, I thought about telling you. Why didn't you? Her eyes came back to his, calm, level. And beneath the calm, something that was not anger exactly, but was in the same neighborhood as anger, something that had been living there for a while and had learned to keep its voice down. Because by the time I understood what Celeste was, Evelyn said, I had also understood what she was to you. And I decided to wait and see which one you'd figure out first. The coffee shop noise moved around them. Other conversations, the grind of the espresso machine, the scrape of a chair somewhere behind Roman. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that had no idea what was happening at this particular table. You waited, Roman said. His voice had gone very quiet. Not dangerous quiet, something else. The quiet of a man who is hearing something that is rearranging his understanding of the last year of his life and has not yet finished the rearranging. You had this information and you waited. I was your wife, Evelyn said. I was trying to figure out how to protect both of us. And then? Her jaw tightened, barely visible, but he knew her face and he caught it. And then I came home with the ultrasound, she said, and I stopped trying to protect both of us. They met twice more in the following week. The second meeting was at a different location, Evelyn's choice again. Different part of the city, same principle of visibility and anonymity. This time Naomi Calder came with her, sitting at Evelyn's left with a leather folio and the expression of a woman who had been in rooms with powerful men her entire career and had long since stopped being impressed by the experience. Sal came with Roman. The two attorneys regarded each other with the professional wariness of people who understand they are on opposite sides of something that has not yet become a full war and would prefer, for different reasons, to keep it that way. Evelyn presented the documentation. Roman and Sal worked through it over 4 hours. The communication records, the financial trail, the timeline of Dario's interference laid out with the methodical precision of someone who had been building a case without knowing whether she would ever use it. At some point during the 3rd hour, Sal looked up from a particular document, glanced at Roman, and then looked at Evelyn with an expression that Roman had seen on the old man's face perhaps twice in 11 years. Respect. Genuine, unguarded, slightly surprised respect. This is comprehensive, Sal said. I had time, Evelyn said. This is more than time, Sal said. This is... He stopped. How did you access the intermediary accounts? I didn't access them, Evelyn said. I found someone who had, and who was willing to share what they found, in exchange for certain considerations. What considerations? Evelyn looked at him. Protected ones. Sal looked at Roman. Roman said nothing. The meeting ended with a framework, not an agreement, a framework, which was as far as Naomi would allow things to go in a single session. The documentation would give Roman what he needed to expose Dario's conspiracy to the people currently supporting it. In exchange, Roman would sign the divorce papers in full and release all claims against the marital assets Evelyn had listed. Roman said he needed 48 hours. Naomi said he had 24. Evelyn said nothing during this exchange. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked out the window at the street, and Roman watched her in the moments when he thought he could do so without being obvious. And what he saw on her face during those moments was a stillness that was different from the stillness he remembered. The stillness he remembered had been peaceful. This was resolved. There was a difference. He drove back with Sal in silence for the first 6 minutes. Then Sal said, "She could have given this to the authorities." "I know," Roman said. "She could have given it to Dario in exchange for protection." "I know." "She gave it to you." "I know, Sal." The old man looked out the window. "She's either still in love with you or she's a more strategic thinker than anyone in your organization." Roman looked at the city moving past the glass. Why can't it be both? Sal had no answer for that. The 48 hours Roman had asked for were not spent on the divorce papers. They were spent on Celeste. He had been avoiding it. He knew he had been avoiding it, not from cowardice exactly, but from the particular reluctance of a man who knows that a conversation is going to require him to admit something he is not ready to fully admit, which is that he had been managed, that someone he had chosen to let into the closest possible proximity to his life had been doing so with a purpose that was not the one he had assigned to it. He went to her building on a Tuesday evening. She buzzed him up without speaking, which told him she had been expecting this, which told him she had already made some version of a decision about what she was going to say. She opened the door before he knocked. She was not put together this time, not deliberately disheveled either, just undone in the way of someone who had been inside for several days, making a series of calculations, and had stopped bothering with the performance that calculations require an audience for. She let him in. She sat on the couch. He remained standing. He had learned a long time ago that the person who chooses not to sit is the person who controls the pacing of a conversation, and he was not in a mood to surrender pacing. "Dario Krell," he said. Celeste looked at him. Her face did the thing it had done in their last conversation, the fast, almost invisible shift that happened when a question reached the part of her brain that was still deciding what to lie about. "I don't, Celeste." He said it the way he had said it before. Final. Weightless. The voice that did not raise itself because it did not need to. "I have documentation. I have communication records with dates and times that place you in contact with a member of his organization going back 18 months. I have financial records that show 3 transfers from an account connected to his network into a holding account connected to yours." He paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I want to understand from you, directly, how much of it was your idea and how much of it was his instruction." The room was very quiet. Celeste looked at her hands in her lap for a long time. Then she looked up, and the last of the performance was gone. Not just the controlled, deliberate composure of their previous conversations, but something beneath that, something she had been maintaining since well before Roman had walked into this situation and started asking questions. What was left when it was gone was smaller than he expected, younger than he expected. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "What did you think it would do?" "I thought—" She stopped. "He told me it would just destabilize you, create pressure, that you'd pull back from some of the development projects, maybe restructure, and then everything would settle again." "And you believed that?" "I wanted to believe it." Roman looked at her. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice had gone flat in the way of someone who has decided that the truth, at this point, costs less than the alternative. "He has my brother," she said. The room shifted. Not physically, but something in the air of it changed. The temperature, the weight, the way sound moved through it. Roman stared at her. "Say that again," he said. "My brother, Luca." She pressed her lips together. "He got into something with Dario's people 2 years ago. A debt. It was supposed to be manageable, and then it wasn't, and by the time I understood how not manageable it was, Dario already knew who I was connected to." She exhaled. "He came to me. He didn't threaten Luca outright. He said Luca's situation could be resolved or could become much worse, depending on how cooperative I was prepared to be." Roman said nothing. "He wanted access," she said. Your schedule, your meeting locations, who you were seeing and when. Which of your legitimate investments were most vulnerable to outside interference?" She paused. "He said all he needed was information, that no one would get hurt." "And the morning," Roman said. "Evelyn." Celeste's throat moved. "He knew about the appointment," she said. He said creating a domestic crisis would redirect your attention, that a man dealing with a fractured marriage is a man who's not watching his investments." She looked up at Roman. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was not entirely steady. "He chose the morning. He told me if I wasn't there, Luca's situation would deteriorate immediately." Roman was very still. He stood in the middle of the living room of the woman he had been sleeping with for 14 months and understood, with the precise and terrible clarity of a man who is very good at understanding things he would prefer not to understand, exactly what had happened. He had not made a choice 14 months ago to begin an affair. He had been positioned. Not entirely. He was not going to insult his own intelligence by pretending that Dario Krell had manufactured his desires out of nothing. The choice had been his. The failure of fidelity had been his. He owned that and would continue to own it. But the woman, the access, the 14 months of careful proximity, the specific engineered morning when Evelyn had come home from meeting their unborn child, all of it had been architecture. Someone had built a structure around him in his marriage, and he had walked through it like a man who is so confident in his ability to recognize traps that he stops checking for them in the rooms he considers safe. "Where is Luca now?" he said. Celeste blinked. She had clearly not expected that to be the next question. He checks in every 2 weeks. I haven't heard from him in..." She stopped. 11 days. Roman looked at her for a long time. When I walk out of here, he said, I want you to send me everything you have about Luca's situation. Who he owes, where he was when the debt was incurred, every contact you have connected to Dario's people. He paused. Do you understand me? She stared at him. Why? Because Dario used your brother to get to me, and I'm going to make it very difficult for Dario to use anything ever again. He moved toward the door. Your situation with me is finished. You know that. Yes, she said quietly, but the matter with your brother is separate. He opened the door. Send me the information. He left. In the elevator, going down, he gripped the metal railing along the back wall and breathed slowly and deliberately. In, hold, out, the way he had taught himself to do in circumstances that required him to remain functional when what he actually wanted was to put his fist through the nearest wall. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, he was composed. By the time he reached the car, he was already on the phone to Sal. I need everything on Dario, he said. Not a preliminary. Everything. And I need to know who in our organization has had any contact with his people in the last 18 months. A pause. Anyone, I don't care how peripheral the contact seems. You think there are others, Sal said. I think Dario is very patient and very methodical, Roman said, and I think I've been treating him like a minor problem when he has been treating me like a primary target. He got into the car. Call the senior people. Tonight. I don't care what time it is. He ended the call. Marco looked at him in the rearview mirror, waiting for a direction. The office, Roman said. The meeting that night was the worst one Roman had ever run. Not because of the content, though the content was bad enough. Sal's full report on Dario's activities made the preliminary look like a weather forecast against a map of geological fault lines. Dario had been moving for 2 years, not quickly. Slowly, carefully, in the particular way of a man who understood that patience was a weapon that his target would not expect him to have. He had compromised 3 of Roman's legitimate investments through third-party interference. He had positioned assets in 2 of Roman's allied territories through men who appeared, on the surface, to be independent operators but whose financing traced back, through 4 layers of separation, to Dario's holding companies. He had, in 2 separate instances, used people in Roman's own organization. That was the worst part. When Sal put those names on the table, not many, 2 peripheral men in mid-level positions who had been passing scheduling information and meeting locations for the last 8 months, the room went quiet in a specific way. The quiet of men recalibrating, reassessing who was sitting next to them. Roman looked at the 2 names for a long time. Then he made 3 decisions, stated them clearly and briefly, and the meeting was over. He was in the car heading back to the house when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it anyway because at this point the number of people who might call him from an unknown number had narrowed considerably. Roman Vescari. The voice was unfamiliar. Male, middle-aged, with the particular flatness of someone who has made many calls like this one. My employer wanted me to pass along a message. Tell your employer to call me himself, Roman said. He would, but he wanted to be respectful of your time. A pause that was not a pause, but a beat. Deliberate, timed. He's aware of the conversations you've been having with your wife. He wanted you to know that he's aware. And he wanted to express his hope that whatever resolution you reach in your personal matters doesn't create any complications. Roman's hand tightened on the phone. Tell him, Roman said very quietly, that his hope is noted. The call ended. Roman stared at the phone for a moment. Then he called Marco, who was in the front seat. Pull over, he said. Marco pulled over on a street Roman didn't immediately identify. Somewhere on the north side, under an overpass, the city noise buffered by concrete and distance. Dario knows about the meetings with Evelyn, Roman said. Marco turned around in the front seat. He knows she has the documentation, Roman said. He just told me so. Marco was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, she's exposed. Yes. If he decides she's a liability, I know. Roman was already dialing. His hand was perfectly steady. His voice was perfectly level. Inside, something had shifted. A gear engaging that he usually tried to keep from engaging, because once it engaged, the threshold for what he was prepared to do changed, and did not change back easily. Evelyn's phone rang 4 times. 5, 6. He was on his feet and out of the car, standing on the sidewalk under the overpass with the city noise all around him and his heart doing something it had never done before in 31 years of doing things. Just running, flat out, with no calculation attached. 7, 8. Roman. Her voice. Clear, slightly breathless, like she had moved quickly to answer. Where are you, he said. A pause. Brief, but he felt it. I'm at the apartment, she said. What's wrong? Are you alone? Yes. Roman, lock the door, he said. Every lock you have. Don't open it for anyone until I contact you again. Don't use your phone for anything else. A longer pause this time. He could hear her breathing, could hear the quality of her silence. Not fear yet, but the moment right before it. The moment when a person who is smart enough to understand danger recognizes that the person warning them is genuinely afraid. How bad, she said. I'm coming to you, he said. How long until I know the address? Another silence. Longer, the longest. He stood under the overpass and waited and did not try to fill it because filling it would not make it shorter, and she deserved to make this decision in however many seconds she needed. I'll send it, she said. Thank you, he said. He was back in the car before the message came through. When it came, Marco was already moving. Roman looked at the address. West Side, not far from where they'd met the first time, consistent with everything Evelyn would choose, and then he looked out the window at the city. He thought about what Sal had said, the difference between wanting her back and needing her safe, the difference in what those things required from him. He had gone into this, he knew, wanting both. He understood now, with the specific cold clarity of a man standing in a situation that had just removed all the convenient ambiguities, that he could not use her safety as a vehicle for his wants, that if he arrived at her door and she was safe, and she still looked at him with that calm, resolved expression and told him she did not want him back, he was going to have to absorb that and leave. And that understanding, the genuine, undefended acceptance of it, was, he realized, the first honest thing he had felt since the night she walked out. The city moved past the windows. Marco drove. Roman's phone buzzed. It was not Evelyn. It was a number he recognized as one of Dario's known intermediaries, a number that had appeared in Sal's report, and that no one from this number should have had any reason to call, because this was not a number connected to anything public. He answered it. Mr. Vescari. A different voice this time, younger. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Krell, who would like to meet. When? Roman said. Tomorrow morning. Where? The man gave an address. A restaurant in the West Loop. Neutral ground. Public. The same logic Evelyn had applied to their first meeting, which meant Dario had thought about this. Tell him I'll be there, Roman said, and ended the call. He put the phone down. He looked at the address Marco was navigating toward. Evelyn's address, Evelyn's building, now 6 minutes away. He had one night. One night before a meeting with the man who had spent 2 years systematically dismantling Roman's life from the inside, who had used a woman's brother and Roman's own appetites, and the specific cruelty of a carefully chosen morning to reduce everything Roman had built to a position of maximum vulnerability. One night before everything that had been building toward something, the divorce, the documentation, the evidence Evelyn had assembled with the patience of a woman who had decided, long before the red heels appeared at the base of the staircase, that she was going to understand the world she was living in thoroughly enough to survive whatever it required her to survive. The car stopped. Marco looked back. We're here. Roman looked at the building. Ordinary. Anonymous. The kind of building a woman who was very good at disappearing would choose. He got out. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the cold, with the city making its indifferent noise all around him, and he looked up at the windows of the building and thought about what was waiting inside. Not just Evelyn, not just the conversation they were going to have, but the point at which this entire situation had arrived. He had signed nothing yet. He had given Evelyn nothing except words and the beginning of a plan. And Dario, who had started this 2 years ago with patience and calculation, had just made a move that told Roman something essential. He was afraid. Patient men do not make calls like the one Roman had received unless they are afraid. And the thing Dario was afraid of, the specific threat that had caused him to break his own careful rhythm and reach out directly, was not Roman's money or his men, or the organization that was currently shaken but intact. It was the folder Evelyn had placed on the table in a coffee shop on the west side and left in the neutral space between them. It was the documentation. The 18 months of records. The evidence that could collapse Dario's operation not through violence but through exposure. The kind of exposure that removes allies, dries up financing, and leaves a man standing in the middle of an empire he built, on the assumption that the information he was most afraid of would never be assembled into a single coherent case. Evelyn had assembled it. And tomorrow morning, Roman was going to walk into a meeting with the man who had engineered the destruction of his marriage, who had used a woman's trapped brother and Roman's own weaknesses as tools, who had calculated that Roman Vescari's most significant vulnerability was the woman sleeping in a small apartment on the west side of Chicago. He had calculated correctly, but he had made one error. He had assumed that vulnerability would paralyze Roman. He had not considered what Roman was capable of when something he could not afford to lose was genuinely at stake. Not money, not territory, not reputation, but something that required him to be a different version of himself than the version he had been running on for 31 years. Roman looked at the building one more time. Then he walked toward the door, and everything that happened next began. She opened the door before he knocked. She had been watching through the peephole. He understood that immediately, the way the door swung open with the precision of someone who had been standing on the other side with their hand on the knob, waiting. She was still dressed. It was past 10 at night, and she was still dressed, which told him she had not been sleeping, which told him she had understood from the tone of his voice exactly what kind of night this was. She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small in the way he had expected, functional, sparse, chosen for what it wasn't rather than what it was. A couch, a table with a laptop and papers, a kitchen that showed signs of actual use, which meant she had been taking care of herself, which was the first thing he registered with something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. She closed the door behind him. He heard her turn both locks. She turned to face him. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. All of it. The call from the unknown number, the intermediary's message, the confirmation that Dario knew about their meetings, and the documentation. He told it cleanly, without softening it, because Evelyn did not respond well to softening and because the situation did not have room for it. She listened standing up. She did not sit, did not move to the couch, did not do anything that suggested she needed support. She stood in the middle of the small living room with her arms crossed. Not defensive, that was never what it meant with her. It was just the way she held herself when she was processing, and she listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's moving up his timeline," she said. "Yes." Because he knows that once the documentation is in the right hands, his operation loses its insulation. She uncrossed her arms. He needs to act before that happens. "He's asked for a meeting, tomorrow morning." She looked at him. "What does he want from the meeting?" "I don't know yet, but I know what I want from it." She waited. "I want him to understand," Roman said, "that everything he built his strategy on has changed." He paused. "And I need to know, before I walk into that room, whether you're still willing to let me use the documentation." Her expression shifted, barely, but he caught it. The slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was weighing something. "I was always willing," she said. "That was the agreement." "The agreement had conditions." "It still does." He nodded. "I know." They stood looking at each other across the small apartment, and the air between them had the particular quality of a silence that has a lot inside it. Not hostility exactly, not tenderness exactly, but the specific weight of two people who know each other very well, standing in a situation that neither of them would have designed. "You need to be somewhere safer tonight," he said. "I'm fine here." "Evelyn, I'm fine here," she said again. And the repetition was not stubbornness for its own sake, but was the voice of a woman who had spent 2 weeks rebuilding her sense of what she was capable of handling and was not going to surrender it in the first 5 minutes of being back in the same room as him. "I'll be careful. I'll stay off my phone. But I'm not going to your house, and I'm not going anywhere that looks like I've lost my nerve because I haven't." Roman looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. She blinked. He thought she had expected more resistance. "I'll have Marco on the street," he said. "Visible enough that anyone watching understands this building is covered. That's all." She considered this. "Fine." He moved toward the door. He had his hand on the knob when her voice came from behind him. Roman. He turned. She was standing with her arms at her sides now, and her face had changed. Not softened, but opened slightly, the way a door opens a crack before the person on the other side decides whether to open it all the way. Be careful tomorrow, she said. It was not an expression of love. It was not the beginning of a reconciliation. He understood that. He understood it clearly and accepted it without trying to make it into something it was not. I will, he said, and left. He did not sleep. He sat in the study at the house that had been a home and was now just a house, the distinction apparent in every room. And he went through Sal's full report page by page, not because he hadn't read it already, but because the meeting in the morning required him to know it the way you know a piece of music you're going to perform, where the knowledge is in your hands and your breath, not just your brain. Sal arrived at 7 in the morning without being called, because Sal was 63 years old and had been doing this long enough to know when his presence was required. He sat across from Roman with coffee and said nothing for a moment. Then, I need to say something before you go in. Say it. Dario is going to offer you something. Sal turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. He's going to offer you a version of this situation in which everyone walks away, in which the documentation disappears, the interference stops, and you both agree to a line neither side crosses. He's going to make it sound reasonable. He paused. It will not be reasonable. It will be a delay. He does not make agreements he intends to honor with people he has already decided are obstacles. Roman looked at him. I know. Then you know you're not walking into a negotiation. No, Roman said. I'm walking into a demonstration. Sal was quiet for a moment. What kind of demonstration? The kind where I show him what it costs to build 2 years of strategy on the assumption that my marriage was my weakness. Roman set down his own cup. He used Evelyn to get to me. He used a woman's brother. He engineered the specific moment that would cause the most damage, and then he sat back and waited for the fallout to do his work for him. He stood up. He got the fallout. He got everything he planned for, and he still lost because the one variable he didn't account for was the one that was sitting quietly in the next room while he was counting his advantages. Sal looked up at him. She gave you the documentation, the old man said. She built the documentation, Roman said. There's a difference. The restaurant was on the West Loop, 3 blocks from the river, the kind of establishment that was expensive enough to guarantee privacy and ordinary enough to guarantee deniability. Roman arrived 5 minutes early. His security took positions he did not need to specify because Marco had already run the space and the men knew where to be. Dario Krell was already there. He was 54 years old, medium height, the kind of build that suggested he had been athletic once and had not entirely let it go. He was sitting at a corner table with 2 men positioned behind him, and he was drinking water, and he was looking at Roman with the expression of a man who believes he is in control of a meeting before it has started. Roman sat down. The 2 men looked at each other. Dario spoke first. I appreciate you coming. I almost didn't, Roman said, but you did. A slight smile. Not warm. The smile of a man who has spent many years practicing the appearance of warmth for rooms where it was tactically useful. Which tells me you're still thinking practically. That's good. That's the Roman Vescari I respect. You don't respect me, Roman said. You've been trying to dismantle me for 2 years. Those aren't the same thing. The smile held. Business. Is that what it was? Competition, Dario said. Chicago is large, but it isn't unlimited. Your organization has holdings that create friction, with the direction mine is growing. I identified an opportunity to reduce that friction. He paused. I did not intend for it to become personal. Roman looked at him steadily. You used my wife. I used a situation, Dario said. The situation involved your wife. That's regrettable. That's regrettable, Roman repeated. Yes. Dario picked up his water. I want you to know, the involvement of your wife was not my preference. It was the most efficient available path, and I took it. I would take it again under the same circumstances. But I want you to know it wasn't personal. The calm with which he said it was more infuriating than anger would have been. Roman absorbed it without moving. What do you want from this meeting? Roman said. Clarity. Dario set his glass down. I'm told your wife has documentation connecting my organization to interference in your legitimate holdings. I want to understand your intentions with that documentation. And if my intention is to use it, then we have a problem. Dario's voice did not change. The documentation, if used in the way I imagine you're considering, would create significant exposure for my operation. I would be forced to respond to that exposure in ways that would be inconvenient for many people, including some people adjacent to your own organization. Roman looked at him. Is that a threat? It's a description of consequences, Dario said. I prefer to avoid them. I suspect you do as well. He leaned forward slightly. I'm prepared to make this simple. The interference in your holdings stops, permanently. The people I had inside your organization, yes, I know you've identified them. They're yours to handle as you see fit. I will withdraw from the Loomis development entirely. In exchange, the documentation disappears, and we establish a clear understanding of boundaries going forward. He sat back. That's my offer, he said. I think it's a reasonable one. Roman was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table between them. He looked at Dario's hands, still and deliberate on either side of his water glass. He looked at the two men behind Dario, who were watching Roman's security the way predatory animals watch other predatory animals, with professional attention and no emotion. You had Celeste threaten her brother, Roman said. Her brother made his own. You had her brother held as leverage to force a woman to help you engineer the specific moment that would most damage my marriage. Roman's voice was absolutely level. You didn't just use a situation. You built one. You built it around the worst moment my wife experienced in the last 6 years, and you timed it to coincide with something she had been waiting for and hoping for, and that I made her face alone. The table was very quiet. And you're telling me, Roman said, that it wasn't personal. Dario looked at him. For the first time, something shifted in the older man's expression. Not guilt. Nothing as human as guilt, but the recalibration of a man who has miscalculated the temperature of a room. What do you want? Dario said. I want you to understand something, Roman said. Your offer assumes that I'm negotiating from the same position I was in 2 weeks ago. I'm not. He put his hands flat on the table. 2 weeks ago, my organization was fractured, my wife was gone, and you had a clear path to at least 3 of my primary holdings. That window is closed. The people you had inside my organization have been removed. The Loomis development is restructured in a way that removes your point of interference. And the allies you were counting on to support a move against my territory received, this morning, a package of documentation demonstrating the extent of your interference in my organization. He paused. Not from me. From a third-party legal office. With a very detailed cover letter. Dario went very still. The allies you're referring to, he started, are reading it right now, Roman said, or they've already read it. Either way, the phone calls you're expecting from them this afternoon are going to sound different than you planned. The two men behind Dario shifted. One of them moved his hand slightly. Not a reach, not yet, but an adjustment, a readiness. Marco, from across the room, moved his chair back exactly 2 inches. Dario looked at Roman, and the calculation happening behind his eyes was visible in the way the calculations of careful men sometimes become visible when the situation has outrun the preparation. You released the documentation, he said, before this meeting. Before this meeting, Roman confirmed. That was... Dario stopped. He pressed his lips together. That was not a negotiating move. No, Roman said. It wasn't. He stood up. I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here so you could hear it from me directly, in person, that this is finished. Your operation in my territory is finished. The strategy you spent 2 years building is finished. And if you move against anything connected to me or anyone connected to me, including my wife, including her attorney, including any person within 3 degrees of my personal life, I will stop being someone who uses documentation. He buttoned his jacket. Are we clear? He said. Dario looked up at him. The controlled, warm-adjacent expression was entirely gone. What was underneath it was harder and colder and less practiced. You're making an enemy, Dario said. You made yourself my enemy 2 years ago, Roman said. I'm just the last one to find out. He moved back from the table. Enjoy your breakfast. He walked out. On the sidewalk, in the sharp morning air, he let himself exhale for the first time since sitting down. Marco fell into step beside him. How did he take it? Marco said. The way a man takes something when he's doing the math on whether he has enough left to respond, Roman said. We'll know within 24 hours which direction he goes. And if he goes the wrong direction? Roman looked at the street ahead. Then we find out what he's actually made of. The call from Sal came 40 minutes later while Roman was in the car. 3 of the 4 allies have responded, Sal said. His voice had the quality it got when he was reporting news. That was better than expected and was being careful not to trust it too fully yet. Rinaldi is out. He's formally withdrawn from the joint development Dario was using as a staging point. The other 2 are more cautious, but the communication from both suggests they're not prepared to take on the exposure the documentation represents. And Dario's own people? That's the part I'm less certain about. A pause. He has people who are loyal in the way people are loyal when loyalty is all they have. They won't care about the documentation. They'll care about what it means for their position if Dario falls. Another pause. I'm hearing there's movement on the south side. One of the warehouses connected to his operation has gone dark in the last 2 hours. Could be nothing. Could be repositioning. Roman looked out the car window. Or it could be preparation. Yes, Sal said. It could be that. I need someone on Evelyn, Roman said immediately. Already done. I anticipated, not Marco's people, Roman said. Someone she doesn't know. Invisible. I don't want her to feel surveilled. I want her actually protected. There's a difference. I understand. And Celeste? A brief silence. Roman. She gave me information. That puts her at risk. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. She's not my responsibility, and she knows that. But make sure she's somewhere that isn't her apartment for the next 48 hours. Sal said he would handle it. Roman ended the call and sat in the moving car and tried to think forward. To the next 12 hours, the next 24. The sequence of what Dario's possible moves were and what Roman's responses to each of them looked like. He was halfway through the second scenario when his phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it. Mr. Vescari. A woman's voice. Not young, not old, professional. My name is Carol Rice. I'm calling from the Calder Law Office on behalf of Evelyn Vescari. Roman straightened. Is she all right? Ms. Vescari is fine, the woman said. She asked me to relay that she's aware of the morning's developments. She's been in contact with Ms. Calder, and that she's ready to proceed with the next phase when you are. He breathed. Tell her I'm ready. She also asked me to tell you, a pause, the small pause of someone relaying a message they want to get exactly right. She said, don't mistake what I'm doing for forgiveness, but I'm not going to let what he did to us destroy what we built, even if I'm the only one who still sees the difference. Roman closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he opened them. Tell her I understand, he said. He sat with that for the rest of the drive. The warehouse went active at 11:40 that night. Sal called it in. 3 vehicles, 12 men that his person on the ground could count, probably more that couldn't be counted from the angle available. Moving deliberately, not scrambling, not the movement of men responding to a crisis, but the movement of men executing a plan that had been laid out before the crisis arrived. Dario had not gone the direction of retreat. Roman took the call standing in the kitchen of the house, still dressed, the city visible through the large windows in the darkness, the lights doing what lights do at this hour, making Chicago look like a grid of orange and white certainty from a distance that hid everything complicated. He's going after the Loomis site, Sal said. If he can create a physical disruption, damage the site, put it in litigation, make it unusable for the next 18 months, he recovers some of what the documentation cost him. It's not the full strategy, but it's damage. The site has security. His people are better than our site security. He knows that because he spent 8 months getting information from people inside our organization. A pause. Roman, I need a decision. Roman looked at the window, at the city, at the lights. He thought about the Loomis site, the development that had started as an investment and had become, in the last 2 weeks, something else entirely. The asset Evelyn had flagged, the property that contained her inheritance folded into its structure, the money she had brought into the marriage that had been absorbed and repackaged until it was nearly invisible. It was hers as much as his. And Dario knew that. Dario was hitting Loomis specifically because he knew that. Don't engage at the site, Roman said. Sal was quiet. Roman, I said don't engage there. He turned away from the window. Let him go to Loomis. Let him send his 12 men and whatever he's got behind them. The site security holds them for 30 minutes, 40 if we're lucky, and in that time I want every person connected to his operation, every allied interest, every financing source, every business license connected to his legitimate holdings to receive the second package. A silence. You prepared a second package, Sal said. Evelyn prepared a second package, Roman said. She gave it to Calder's office 2 days ago. I've been waiting to know whether to use it. Another silence. Longer. The second package, Sal said carefully. How much worse is it than the first? The first package told people what Dario had done, Roman said. The second package tells them what he was planning to do next. He moved toward the door of the study. Release it, all of it, tonight. He could hear Sal's breathing on the other end of the call. And the site, Sal said, protect the people. Let the structure take what it takes. Buildings can be rebuilt. He paused with his hand on the doorframe. Release the package, Sal, now. He ended the call. He stood in the doorframe for a moment. He thought about Evelyn sitting in the coffee shop with the folder in the neutral space between them. The 18 months of documentation she had assembled without knowing she would need it, assembled simply because she was a woman who could not live in a world she didn't understand. She had built the weapon that was being used right now. She had built it before she knew there was a war. He was on his way to the car when his phone lit up with a message. Not Sal. Not Marco. Evelyn. I heard about the warehouse. I'm fine. Don't come here. He stared at the message. Then, the second package. Did you release it? He typed back. Sal is releasing it now. A pause. Then, good. That's the one that ends it. He stood on the front steps of the house with the cold air on his face and the city out beyond the perimeter and his phone warm in his hand, and he read those 5 words. That's the one that ends it. And understood that she had known, when she built it, exactly what it was for. She had known there would be a second front, had known that the first package would force Dario's hand and the second would collapse what was left, had built both of them, in sequence, in the small apartment on the west side, while Roman had been spending 12 days trying to find her. He got in the car. Marco looked at him, waiting. The office, Roman said. We're going to be up all night. Marco pulled out. The city slid past the windows, lights and dark and lights again. And Roman sat in the back of the moving car with the phone in his hand and the name on the screen and 12 hours of consequences still unspooling in real time around him. Dario's men moving on the Loomis site, the packages landing in the inboxes of every person who had ever considered standing behind Dario Krell's operation, Sal's people watching and counting and waiting. All of it set in motion by a woman who had carried an ultrasound photograph home in one hand and her husband's favorite dinner in the other, and had walked upstairs not because she didn't suspect but because she had to know. All of it moving now toward the morning. His phone buzzed one more time. Not Evelyn. Sal. Package delivered. First responses coming in. Roman. It's working. He put the phone face down on the seat. He looked at the road ahead, at the city that had been his for most of his adult life, at the dark between the lights, at the distance between where he was sitting right now and everything that was going to be different when the sun came up. He thought about the attorney's office, the table between them, the papers he had not yet signed. He thought about what came after signing them. He thought about a child he had not yet held, who existed somewhere in the city right now, growing in the silence of a small apartment where the locks were turned and the woman inside had already decided who she was going to be on the other side of all of this, and had been, Roman now understood, that person all along. The car moved through the dark, and somewhere across the city, in the offices of people who had built their confidence on the assumption that Dario Krell was a safe investment, phones were ringing with news that would require them to make different calculations before morning. The war that Dario had started 2 years ago, in patience and quiet strategy, was ending tonight in the same way all carefully constructed plans end when someone has been watching them from the inside the entire time, not with an explosion, with a document, with 48 pages of evidence that a woman had assembled in the stillness of the life she was quietly, methodically preparing to leave, and had left behind for the man she was leaving it from, because even in the act of walking away she had understood one thing, that Dario, with all his patience and calculation, had never understood. The strongest move was not the one that destroyed your enemy. It was the one that made destruction unnecessary. Roman's phone lit up one final time before midnight. Unknown number. He answered. Silence on the line for 2 full seconds. Then Dario's voice. Not the measured, warm, adjacent voice from the restaurant. Something rawer. Something that had been running calculations for the last 6 hours and had arrived finally at a number it could not dismiss. You knew, Dario said. Before you walked into that restaurant, you already knew the package was out. Yes, Roman said. A long silence. The second package, Dario said. The financing records, the forward contracts. His voice was very quiet now. That was not from your organization. No, Roman said. Another silence. Longer. The silence of a man understanding something about the shape of what has happened to him. Your wife, Dario said. My wife, Roman said. The line went dead. Roman held the phone for a moment after. Then he put it in his pocket, looked out the car window at the city going past, and sat very still as the first pale suggestion of dawn began somewhere beyond the buildings, somewhere beyond the grid of lights, in the direction of a morning that was going to require him to walk into an attorney's office and do the hardest thing he had ever done. Not face Dario, not rebuild his organization, not survive the war that had just ended, sign the papers, let her go, and trust that the man he was becoming, the one she had forced him into being, the one that had been somewhere inside him the whole time, waiting for the circumstances that required him, was enough to earn, slowly and without promises, the right to be present in the life of a child who did not yet know his name. The car moved. The city moved. Morning was coming, and Roman Vescari had run out of reasons to be afraid of it. The Loomis site lost 2 storage structures and a section of the Eastern Foundation scaffolding before Dario's men pulled back at 2:17 in the morning. Roman got the damage report in the car on the way to the office. He read it twice, put the phone down, and said nothing. Marco didn't ask. The men who had been with Roman long enough understood the difference between silence that required response and silence that required witness, and this was the second kind. The silence of a man absorbing a cost he had agreed to pay and was paying now in full. The structures were insured. The scaffolding could be rebuilt in 3 weeks. The foundation itself had held, which was the part that mattered, which was always the part that mattered when everything around it was burning. He thought about Evelyn's inheritance folded into the Loomis structure. Her money, absorbed and repackaged, nearly invisible in the accounting until she had found it and flagged it and made it visible again. He thought about the fact that Dario had targeted that specific site, knowing what it contained and what it meant, had wanted to take something of hers, even at the end, had needed, apparently, to make the damage personal rather than simply strategic. That told Roman something about Dario that 2 years of organizational intelligence had not told him. He filed it away and kept moving. By 4 in the morning, the responses to the second package had created a cascade that Sal described, over the phone, in the careful language of a man who does not want to say the word collapse, until he is certain the thing has fully collapsed. It had fully collapsed. Dario's primary financing source, a holding structure connected to 3 separate European intermediaries that had been visible in Evelyn's documentation as a forward contract arrangement, froze within 90 minutes of the package landing. The men who ran it were not criminals. They were businessmen who had been profiting from proximity to Dario's operation while maintaining enough separation to claim ignorance. The documentation removed that separation permanently. They did not need to be threatened. They simply stopped returning Dario's calls, which was the business world's version of a door closing in someone's face. 2 of the 4 allied interests issued formal statements of withdrawal from shared ventures before sunrise. The language was careful and impersonal and said nothing about why, which was the language of men who understood that the why was already obvious to everyone and required no elaboration. The third ally called Sal directly, an old man, older than Sal, who had known Roman's father and who spoke in the blunt, exhausted cadences of someone who had watched this particular story play out across 5 decades in 3 different cities. Tell Roman, the old man said, that Dario is finished, not because of the documentation, because of the wife. Any man whose wife builds his rescue package is a man whose enemies have already lost. It just takes the paperwork time to catch up. Sal relayed this to Roman verbatim. Roman listened to it in the pre-dawn gray of his office, sitting behind the desk he had sat behind for 11 years, and felt something move through him that was too complicated to name and too real to dismiss. Dario Krell left Chicago on a Tuesday. Not fled. He was not the kind of man who fled, or could not bring himself to be seen as the kind of man who fled, which in the end amounted to the same thing. He departed. He had holdings in 2 other cities, interests in markets that had not been touched by the documentation, and enough remaining resources to rebuild something smaller and more careful in a geography where Roman Vescari's reach was less immediate. He did not contact Roman again. Roman did not contact him. There were men in this world who would have required a more final resolution. Roman understood that. Several people in his organization expected it, waited for it, measured his response to the situation by whether it arrived. It did not arrive, and Roman did not explain its absence, because the explanation would have sounded, to men who thought in those terms, like weakness. It was not weakness. It was a calculation, the most honest one Roman had made in years. Dario gone and diminished was more useful than Dario gone and martyred. A man who had been exposed and forced out carries his exposure with him wherever he goes. It spreads. It makes his name a cautionary example in rooms Roman will never enter. That was a longer and more complete form of consequence than the alternative, and it cost Roman nothing he was not prepared to lose. The 2 men inside his organization who had been passing information were handled separately and quietly, and with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided that the lesson matters more than the spectacle. One of them had a family. Roman considered this and adjusted accordingly. There were ways to remove someone from a position of trust that did not require destroying everything around them. He used those ways. I was not certain it was the right decision. He was certain it was the decision he could live inside. That had to be enough. The attorney's office was on Michigan Avenue, 14th floor, with a view of the lake that on a clear morning was genuinely, uncomplicatedly beautiful in the way of things that exist entirely outside the concerns of the people looking at them. It was a clear morning. Roman arrived first. He sat in the chair on his side of the long conference table and looked at the lake and thought about nothing in particular. Deliberately, carefully nothing in particular, the way you think about nothing. When you know the next thing that happens is going to require everything you have and you are conserving. Naomi Calder arrived 4 minutes later. She set her folio on the table, acknowledged Roman with a nod that contained no warmth and no hostility, and sat in the chair nearest the door. She checked her phone once, put it face down, and folded her hands. They waited. Evelyn came in at 9 o'clock exactly. She was wearing something Roman had never seen before, a deep green dress, the kind that was simple enough to be professional and specific enough to have been chosen with intention. Her hair was down, which was unusual for a meeting, and she was further along than the last time he had seen her, the pregnancy unmistakable now, the particular way she moved through the doorway, carrying the changed weight of herself, with the matter-of-fact ease of a woman who had made her peace with her body's current requirements. She sat down. She looked at Roman. He looked at her. Naomi opened her folio. Gerald Fuchs, seated to Roman's left, uncapped his pen. The documents were already on the table. They had been couriered over the previous afternoon, reviewed by both sets of attorneys, confirmed to be in order. This was not a negotiation. Everything had been negotiated. This was the signing. "Before we begin," Roman said. Naomi looked up. Gerald looked up. Evelyn looked at him with the expression she wore when she was prepared for something to be difficult and had decided in advance not to be undone by it. "I want to say something," Roman said. "Not for the attorneys, for you." Evelyn waited. "I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry," he said. "You've heard me say I'm sorry, and you know what it costs me to say it, which means you also know that my saying it again right now, in this room, with these papers on the table between us, would be the cheapest possible version of the word." He paused. "What I want to say is that I understand what you did. Not just the documentation, all of it. I understand that you spent 6 years learning my world because you needed to understand it, and that you used that knowledge to protect both of us even when I had given you no reason to protect me. I understand that the morning you came home, the specific cruelty of that morning, was not accidental, and that you absorbed it and still made a choice to give me the tools to survive what came after." He stopped. Evelyn's expression had not changed, but something around her eyes had a slight tightening, the almost invisible sign of someone receiving something they had not permitted themselves to expect. "I understand," Roman said, "that you are the reason I still have anything worth having. And I want you to know that I know that. Whatever happens in this room and whatever happens after it, I know that." The room was quiet. Naomi looked at her folio. She was not a woman who showed things easily, but she had the careful stillness of someone who is choosing not to show something. Evelyn looked at Roman for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. Quiet. Not forgiving anything, not opening any door, but genuine. The real, unguarded thank you of a person receiving something they had not known they needed until it arrived. She looked at the papers. "Let's finish this," she said. Roman signed first. His signature was the same as it always was, economical, legible, the signature of a man who had signed thousands of documents and had never developed any of the ornamentation that some men develop as a way of making their mark on things. He signed 3 places, initialed 2, and passed the document to Gerald without looking at it again. Evelyn signed where Naomi indicated. Her handwriting was different from his, more deliberate, the letters slightly larger than necessary, the kind of writing that takes its time. She initialed the same places, added a date where required, and set the pen down. Naomi gathered the pages. And then Evelyn reached into the bag she had brought with her and took out her wedding ring. Roman watched her hand move, watched her hold the ring for a moment between her thumb and 2 fingers, not dramatically, not with the exaggerated weight of someone performing grief, just looking at it, the way you look at something you have carried for a long time and are now putting down. She placed it on the table beside Roman's signature, not in front of him, not pushed toward him, just beside the document, in the space where the evidence of the marriage now lived, in ink, on paper, with dates and initials. Roman looked at it. Then he looked up at her. She was looking at him with the expression he would carry with him for a long time after that room. Not sad exactly, not satisfied exactly, but resolved in a way that had depth to it, that had cost something to arrive at. The expression of someone who has made a decision that was not easy and is not pretending it was easy, but is also not pretending it was wrong. "Will you let me be his father?" Roman said. The question came out quieter than he intended, less controlled. It was the question that had been living in him since the moment he had seen the ultrasound photograph on the table in the bedroom. The one that had been waiting through all of the strategy and all of the documentation and all of the nights in the car, looking at the city and all of the signings and the war and the collapse of Dario's operation and every single other thing that had happened between that moment and this one. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he felt the full weight of the waiting, felt it the way you feel cold air, physically, in your chest and your hands. "You can earn the right to be present in his life," she said. "That's what I can offer you right now. Not a promise, not an exemption from the work, just the opportunity to show up and keep showing up and be consistent in a way that—" She paused. Her jaw tightened slightly. "In a way that you weren't when it mattered most." Roman absorbed this. "And my place in yours?" he said. He said it knowing the answer. He asked it because not asking it would be its own kind of dishonesty. Her expression didn't close. It simply held, open and clear and final. "You'll never earn your place back in mine," she said. "I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to hear it said plainly, rather than implied, for the next 10 years while we figure out how to coexist for our son." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "I'm not going to make this harder than it has to be. For his sake. And because I don't have the energy to maintain that kind of damage. I need the energy for other things." "For the firm," Roman said. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, briefly, that he knew. "Naomi mentioned it," he said. "I asked?" Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Yes, for the firm." He nodded. He did not tell her it was a good idea because she did not need his opinion on whether her decisions were good ideas. He did not say he was proud of her because she did not need that either. He sat with what she had said and let it be what it was, the complete and honest answer to the question he had asked, and he did not try to fit more into it than it contained. "Okay," he said. That was all. Adrian Roman Vescari was born on a Thursday in late autumn, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, dark hair, which surprised no one, hands that were disproportionately large for his body, which made the nurse laugh and Evelyn cry, and the room feel, for the duration of the laugh and the cry, like something other than the complicated thing it was. Evelyn had told Roman 2 days before that she would call him when it was time. She had meant it the way she meant everything, precisely, without room for misinterpretation. Not an invitation to be present for the labor, not a door propped open, simply the acknowledgement that he had a right to know his son existed in the world at the earliest possible moment. He was in the car when the call came. He pulled over. Marco stopped the car without being asked, and he answered, and Evelyn's voice came through with the breathlessness of a woman who had just done something enormous and had not yet caught up to herself. "He's here," she said. "He's healthy. He's—" She stopped. He could hear her trying to organize herself. "He's very loud." Roman pressed his hand flat against the car window. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me." "I told you I would," she said, simply, without warmth or coldness. A fact. "I know," he said. "I know you did." A pause. Brief. "You can come tomorrow," she said. "In the morning. I'll tell the desk to expect you." He sat in the pulled-over car on the north side of Chicago, with his hand on the cold glass, and the city all around him, and something happening in his chest that was not a feeling he had words for, because he had never been the kind of man who developed vocabulary for things he had not expected to survive. "I'll be there," he said. He arrived at 9. The room was private. Evelyn was sitting up in the bed when he came in. Not in the bed, sitting on the edge of it, which was very Evelyn, which was the posture of a woman who would accept the accommodation of a hospital bed, but was not going to become horizontal in it in front of Roman Vescari if she could help it. She was in a gray sweater that was too large for her, which was also very Evelyn, the particular way she dressed when she was not performing anything for anyone. She looked exhausted. She looked, underneath the exhaustion, like someone who had just done the hardest thing she had ever done and was still too close to it to understand what it had cost her, but was already, characteristically, beginning to calculate the next thing. In her arms was the baby. Roman stopped just inside the door. He was not a man who stopped. Movement was operational. Movement was purpose. You moved toward what you needed and away from what threatened you, and the stopping was for rooms where stopping had strategic value. He stopped because there was no strategy available for this moment, and his body knew it before his brain did. Adrian was asleep. The sleep of a newborn, which is the most absolute and trustful form of sleep that exists. The sleep of someone who has no information yet about the world, and therefore no defenses against it. His face was the face of someone who had not yet become a person, and was somehow already entirely himself. Dark hair and soft, damp wisps. The large hands, visible even curled at rest, that the nurse had noted. Roman's hands. He stood in the doorway and looked at his son for a long moment before he could move again. Evelyn watched him. She did not speak. She had the particular stillness of a woman who has decided to let something happen without commentary, not because she was indifferent to it, but because she understood that some moments require witnesses rather than participants. Roman crossed the room. He stopped beside the bed and looked down at the baby for another moment, and then he looked at Evelyn, and she met his eyes, and something passed between them that was not reconciliation and was not love as it had previously existed between them, but was something else, something that two people share when they have been through a war together and come out the other side changed, separately, into people who recognize each other across the distance of what happened. "Can I hold him?" Roman said. Evelyn shifted Adrian in her arms, adjusting carefully, and held him out. Roman took his son. He held him the way men hold newborns when they are afraid of getting it wrong, with the rigid, over-careful attention of someone who has been told something is fragile and is terrified of being the person who breaks it. Then something in his arms adjusted without instruction, found the right angle, the right weight distribution, and the rigidity released, and he just held the baby. Adrian made a sound, not a cry, a small, private sound, the sound of someone shifting between one form of unconsciousness and another. His face compressed briefly, then released. His hand opened slightly, then closed. Roman looked at his face. He looked at it for a long time. Later, he would not be able to say what he felt in those minutes exactly. Not happiness. It was too complicated and too costly to be called happiness. Not grief, though grief was in it. Something that was all of it at once and more than all of it. The specific, unrepeatable sensation of understanding that the thing you are holding is the most important thing you have ever held and that you have absolutely no idea, yet, how to be what it requires you to be. I was aware distantly that his composure was failing, not dramatically, not in the way anyone watching might have described as breaking down, just the particular undoing of a man who is very controlled and has encountered something control cannot address. He looked up. Evelyn was watching him. Her expression was complicated, layered in a way that had no single name, the expression of a woman watching the man who broke her heart. Hold their son for the first time and feeling many things about that simultaneously and being honest enough with herself not to flatten them into something simpler. She did not look away. He did not look away. "He has your hands," she said. Quiet, neutral in tone, true. "He has your everything else," Roman said, which was also true and also was not nothing, as a thing to say. The corner of her mouth moved, not a smile exactly. The ghost of one, the reflex that exists even when a full smile is not available. She reached out and adjusted the edge of the blanket around Adrian's shoulder with the automatic, matter-of-fact tenderness of a woman who had been doing this for less than 24 hours and was already so deeply instinctual about it that it required no thought. Roman watched her hand. He thought about all the things he had said and not said, all the decisions. The morning she had come home from the clinic alone. The 4 seconds she had stood in the bedroom doorway before she placed the photograph on the table. I thought about the 6 years before that, the real ones, the ones that had been genuinely good, the ones that had contained real tenderness and real partnership, and the specific pleasure of living beside a person who was better than you in ways you were not always willing to admit. He thought about whether any version of the future available to him was worth having if this was what it had cost. He thought about Adrian's face. He thought about what Evelyn had said in the attorney's office. "I need the energy for other things." He thought, yes, that was exactly right. That was what she deserved. And the work of earning the right to be in his son's life was going to take energy too. Energy he had been spending for 31 years on other things entirely. And it was going to require him to be a different kind of present than he had ever been. Not the controlled, managed presence of a man who shows up in rooms already knowing what he's going to say, but the uncertain, improvised, consistently available presence of a father who does not know yet how to do this and is going to find out by doing it. He could do that. He was not certain he could do it well, but he could do it. He could show up and not leave. He could be consistent in a way he had not been before. He could accept that being permitted to hold his son was not a given, but a gift, and that gifts require maintenance. He looked at Adrian's sleeping face one more time. Then he carefully, with the same over-careful attention as before, handed the baby back to Evelyn. She took him with the ease of someone who had already begun to know how. "I'll be back Saturday," Roman said, "if that's okay." "That's fine," Evelyn said. "I'll call first." "Yes." A pause. "Roman," he stopped. She looked at him with the same expression as the attorney's office. Resolved, open, the expression of a woman who has decided that honesty is less expensive than its alternatives, even when honesty is hard. "What you said this morning, in the meeting." She adjusted Adrian against her shoulder. "About understanding what I did." Another pause. "It mattered. I want you to know that it mattered." Roman looked at her. "I meant it," he said. "I know you did," she said. "That's why it mattered." He picked his coat up from the chair beside the door. He left. 8 months later, at a design gala in a ballroom on the 14th floor of a building overlooking the lake, Roman Vescari received an award for the restoration of a landmark building in the West Loop, a 19th century structure that had been commercial space and then storage and then nothing, that her firm had spent 7 months returning to something worth looking at. The award was presented by the Architectural Council of Chicago. The room was full of people who knew her name because of her work, not because of her marriage, and the difference was visible in the way they looked at her when she walked to the front of the room, as someone who had made something, not as someone who was adjacent to someone powerful. She gave a short speech. She thanked her team. She mentioned the building itself, the specific quality of the light through its restored windows in the late afternoon, which she had discovered on a site visit and which had convinced her that the project was worth the months of difficulty it ultimately required. She said that she believed old things that have been broken and put back together are not less valuable for the repair. She said it simply, without looking at anyone in particular, and moved on before it could become something people applied meaning to. Roman was in the back of the room. He had not been invited. He had come anyway, which was a thing he recognized as not entirely appropriate and did it regardless, which was a pattern he was aware of and working on. He stood near the bar with a drink he was not consuming, and he watched Evelyn accept the award with the same ease she had shown at everything in the last 8 months. Not effortlessly, he was close enough now to know the effort, but with the composed, forward-moving energy of someone who had made a decision about who she was going to be and was executing it daily. She looked confident. She looked independent. She looked, he thought, like the version of herself she had been moving toward the entire time he had known her, and had finally arrived at now that the path was no longer running through his shadow. She did not see him until after the crowd had thinned. She came through the back of the room and stopped when she registered him. One beat of surprise, quickly absorbed. She walked over. "You weren't on the list," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the drink in his hand and back at his face and made a small decision about which version of this conversation to have. "How's the Loomis rebuilding?" she said. "On schedule," he said. "They're finishing the eastern scaffolding next week." She nodded. "Good. Your settlement funds were transferred in full," he said. "Gerald sent confirmation to Naomi last Thursday." "I know," she said. "Naomi told me." A brief quiet. "The firm is doing well," he said. It was not a question. He could see that the firm was doing well. He had been following it in the way he followed things. Not intrusively, not in a way she would know about, but with the steady, low-level attention of someone who has a stake in something without owning any part of it. "Very well," she said, without the false modesty that would have been easier. He nodded. He looked toward the cluster of people near the entrance where Adrian's caregiver was standing with the baby. Visible from here, though not close, Adrian awake and alert in the woman's arms with the expression of a 7-month-old taking in a large room for the first time, which was the expression of someone who finds everything equally astonishing and equally worthy of consideration. Roman looked at his son. Evelyn looked at Roman looking at his son. "He started pulling himself up," she said. Her voice had shifted. Still neutral, but warmer in the specific way of parents talking about the small, ordinary milestones of a child. "On furniture. He's not stable yet, but he thinks he is, which is—" She stopped. Something that was close to a real smile. "It's a whole thing. I'll be there Saturday," Roman said. "I'd like to see that." "Okay," she said. He looked back at her. "You won," he said. He said it quietly. Not as a concession, as a recognition of something he had been working up to saying for months, and had not found the right moment for until now, in this ballroom, with the lake visible through the tall windows, and his son across the room, and the award she had earned on the podium behind her. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. "This was never about beating you," she said. She said it without heat, without performance. The way you say a thing that is simply and exactly true. She glanced toward Adrian and the caregiver, and her expression did the thing it did whenever she looked at him. The involuntary opening, the softness that she did not try to manage because with the baby she had decided not to manage it. She looked back at Roman. "It was about making sure that losing you didn't mean losing myself," she said. "That's all it ever was." Roman stood with that. He stood with it, the way you stand with things that are true and complete and that you cannot add anything to without diminishing them. "I know," he said. She looked at him one more time, the look that had layers, that had the marriage in it, and the mourning, and the attorney's office, and the ballroom, and Adrian's face, and the building she had just won an award for, and the version of herself she had almost lost and had not lost. The look of someone who has been through something enormous and is on the other side of it, and knows, clearly, that the other side is different from what she started with, and is learning, daily, to live inside the difference. Then she turned and walked across the ballroom toward their son. Roman watched her go. He watched Adrian's face when he saw her coming. The immediate, uncomplicated recognition of a 7-month-old who knows his mother, who opens toward her like something opening toward light, arms reaching with the absolute trust of someone who has never yet been given a reason not to trust. He watched Evelyn take him from the caregiver's arms and hold him the way she held him. The ease of it, the naturalness, The way her whole body seemed to reorganize itself around his weight, as though it had always known how. He watched his son look over Evelyn's shoulder, scanning the room with the wide, astonished attention of the very young. And then Adrian's eyes found Roman, across the ballroom, through the crowd, under the lights. He looked at his father with the same expression he gave everything, wide, considering, utterly without judgment, not knowing yet what his father was, not knowing yet what anything was, just looking. Roman looked back. He stood beneath the ballroom lights, in the remnants of an empire that was still his. Smaller now, differently organized, stripped of the people who had been costing him more than they were worth. And he looked at his son. He was not the man he had been a year ago. He was not certain yet what he was instead. He was becoming something, being pressed into a different shape by the events of the last year, the way metal is pressed, with heat and force, and the willingness to give up the form you were used to. It was not comfortable. It was not finished. It was, he understood, the work. Not the dramatic work. Not the war and documentation work that was behind him now. The slow, daily, unglamorous work of a man trying to be present in a life he had nearly destroyed and was now being permitted, provisionally and contingently, and with absolutely no guarantee, to stand at the edge of. He could live with contingent. He could work with provisional. He had survived everything else. He could survive the slow patience of earning a thing rather than taking it. Evelyn turned away from the room and carried Adrian toward the exit, talking quietly to the caregiver, back to the ordinary management of a life that was entirely her own. Roman set his untouched drink on a passing tray. He put on his coat. He walked out of the ballroom alone, into the Chicago night, into the cold that had not changed, and the city that had not changed, and the future that was not what he had built it to be. Smaller than his ambition, larger than his deserving, complicated beyond the reach of any calculation. He walked out into it anyway. That was all there was left to do. That was, in the end, what it cost him. And the cost, he had finally learned, was exactly right.